General Joseph E. Johnston was a soldier raised in the old traditions of war. Born in Virginia and trained at West Point, he had fought in the Seminole Wars and the Mexican-American War. Quiet and calculating, Johnston believed battles should be won with maneuver, not slaughter. He distrusted Confederate President Jefferson Davis and hated reckless attacks. Across from him stood Sherman. Sherman was brilliant, unpredictable, and feared by the South. Orphaned as a boy, raised by another family, he struggled through business failures and even suffered a nervous breakdown early in the war. But by 1864, Sherman had become General Ulysses Grant's most trusted commander. And now, he was marching toward Atlanta. If Atlanta fell, the Confederacy might fall with it. Sherman's army was enormous, over 110,000 soldiers backed by more than 250 cannons. Behind them stretched a moving world of railroad workers, medics, wagon drivers, engineers, and enslaved black laborers forced to keep the army moving. The Union force was divided into three massive armies. George H. Thomas commanded the Army of the Cumberland, nearly 73,000 men. Calm and dependable, Thomas was nicknamed the Rock of Chickamauga. James B. McPherson led the Army of the Tennessee. Young, brilliant, and deeply admired by his soldiers, McPherson was one of Sherman's favorites. And John Schofield commanded the smaller Army of the Ohio, a careful and competent officer who would later rise to become Secretary of War. Sherman's generals were colorful personalities, from the loud and arrogant Joseph Hooker to the fearless cavalry commander Hugh Judson Kilpatrick, nicknamed Kill Cavalry because of how recklessly he used his men and horses. Facing this giant was Johnston's Army of Tennessee, only about 41,000 men. Smaller, weaker, outgunned. But Johnston had one thing Sherman feared: defensive genius. His corps commanders included William Hardee, the aggressive John Bell Hood, and Leonidas Polk, a bishop turned Confederate general. Among Johnston's finest division commanders was Patrick Cleburne, an Irish-born officer admired even by Union troops. The Atlanta campaign began with Sherman constantly trying to outflank Johnston. On May 7th, Sherman forced Johnston out of position. At Resaca a few days later, Sherman flanked him again. Then at Cassville, Johnston briefly considered attacking. But hesitation and confusion ruined the chance, and once again the Confederates pulled back. To many Southerners, Johnston's retreats looked cowardly, but Johnston understood something important. Every day Sherman advanced deeper into Georgia, his supply lines stretched farther and farther behind him. Sherman depended on a railroad lifeline running all the way back to Chattanooga. Without it, his giant army would starve. By May 20th, Johnston withdrew to the powerful defenses of Allatoona Pass. Sherman looked at the rugged terrain and decided not to attack directly. Instead, he made another sweeping move west toward Dallas and New Hope Church. But this maneuver came with danger. Sherman temporarily left his railroad supply line exposed. Confederate cavalry under Joseph Wheeler immediately struck Union wagons, burning supplies and harassing the long line behind Sherman's army. Still, the Union columns kept moving. McPherson marched toward Dallas. Thomas pushed south. Hooker's corps advanced down the Burnt Hickory Road. And near a muddy stream called Pumpkin Vine Creek, the campaign suddenly exploded into violence. Union troops crossed near Owens Mill expecting only scattered resistance. Instead, they slammed directly into John Bell Hood's corps. Hood's soldiers had already dug rifle pits and built rough breastworks from logs and rocks. Confederate lookouts had spotted Sherman's approach hours earlier. The trap was ready. Late in the afternoon of May 25th, Union General Joseph Hooker received orders to attack. Sherman believed only part of the Confederate army stood ahead of him. He was wrong. Hooker formed his attack carefully. John Geary's division moved forward first, supported by Alpheus Williams and Daniel Butterfield. The Union soldiers advanced through thick Georgia woods, where visibility was almost non-existent. Men stumbled through underbrush, sweat pouring down their faces in the humid heat. Then suddenly, the Confederate line erupted. Cannons blasted from hidden positions. Musket fire tore through the trees. Men dropped instantly. The Union advance collapsed into chaos as soldiers threw themselves behind logs, rocks, and shallow depressions in the ground. Stuart's Confederate division, only about 4,000 entrenched men with 16 cannons, held firm against nearly 16,000 Union attackers. The fighting became savage. Union soldiers fired so rapidly their rifle barrels burned hot. Colonel James Robinson's brigade reportedly fired nearly 60 rounds per man during the battle. Again and again, Federal troops tried to push forward. Again and again, the Confederates drove them back. Then nature joined the battle. A thunderstorm rolled across the battlefield. Rain poured through the trees. Lightning flashed over screaming soldiers and exploding artillery. Mud mixed with blood. The battlefield earned a terrible nickname that night, Hellhole. For 3 brutal hours, the fighting raged in darkness and rain. When it finally ended, Hooker's corps had lost over 1,600 men. Stuart's Confederates lost only around 400. Southern soldiers cheered from their trenches as the battered Union troops withdrew. Sherman was furious. He blamed Hooker for attacking too slowly, claiming the Confederates had been allowed time to entrench. But the truth was harder to accept. Johnston's entire army had already been waiting there. That night, both armies dug in deeper. Across Georgia, civilians heard the distant roar of artillery and panicked. The war was now approaching Atlanta itself. But New Hope Church was only the beginning. Sherman refused to stop. Determined to break Johnston's line, he launched another attack days later at Pickett's Mill. This time, Union General Thomas J. Wood led the assault through dense forest. But Johnston had anticipated Sherman's move. Patrick Cleburne's division, some of the Confederacy's best soldiers, had already reinforced the area. At 5 p.m., Wood's men attacked. They walked directly into deadly Confederate fire. Cleburne's veterans, especially Hiram Granbury's Texas Brigade, fought with terrifying intensity. Wave after wave of Union soldiers charged forward. Each attack was shattered. By nightfall, Union casualties reached nearly 1,600 men. Confederate losses were fewer than 500. Another bloody defeat for Sherman. Yet Sherman still would not quit. He shifted his army again, searching for another opening. Johnston responded with his own risky plans. At one point, Hood secretly marched his corps through thick woods at night, hoping to strike Sherman's flank. But Confederate cavalry discovered the Union positions were already fortified, and Johnston canceled the attack before disaster struck. Soon afterward, Confederate General William Bate launched another assault near Dallas. At first, Confederate cavalry overran Union pickets and even captured several cannons. For a moment, it looked like the Confederates might finally crack Sherman's army. Then Union General John A. Logan rode into the chaos shouting, "Give them hell, boys." Union infantry counterattacked fiercely. The cannons were recaptured. Confederate assaults collapsed in confusion. Miscommunication turned disaster into catastrophe as some Southern brigades charged without support straight into prepared Union defenses. Hundreds fell within yards of Union trenches. By evening, Confederate losses were horrific. Entire brigades were shattered, and still the campaign dragged on. The forests around Dallas and New Hope Church became nightmares of mud, exhaustion, disease, and constant skirmishing. Sometimes soldiers fired wildly at shadows during the night, convinced enemy attacks were coming through the darkness. Men marched by compass through forests so thick they could barely see a few yards ahead. Rain-soaked uniforms, food ran low, bodies rotted in the woods. But Sherman slowly regained his railroad lifeline near Allatoona Pass. Union engineers repaired tracks almost as fast as Confederate cavalry destroyed them, and that changed everything. Johnston had fought brilliantly. He had delayed Sherman for weeks. He had inflicted heavy casualties. But every retreat cost the Confederacy ground it could never recover. Sherman could replace his losses with fresh reinforcements. Johnston could not. By early June, Johnston realized Sherman was once again threatening his flank. So, under cover of darkness and rain, the Confederate army retreated toward new defensive lines near Marietta. The soldiers slogged through mud, exhausted but still alive. The campaign moved on. But the battles around New Hope Church revealed the strengths and weaknesses of both commanders. Johnston was a master defender who repeatedly frustrated Sherman, but he could never stop him. Sherman absorbed losses, adapted, and kept moving forward like a machine. And the closer Sherman came to Atlanta, the more desperate the Confederacy became. In July 1864, Jefferson Davis finally lost patience with Johnston's endless retreats. He removed him from command and replaced him with the aggressive John Bell Hood. The decision would prove disastrous. Hood launched reckless attacks that devastated the Army of Tennessee. Meanwhile, Sherman eventually captured Atlanta in September 1864, a victory that helped secure Abraham Lincoln's re-election and change the course of the war. The men who fought at New Hope Church carried the scars forever. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. And if you have sure ideas, we'd love to hear from you.